Pretend for a moment that you have pocket queens, and you have a pretty great flop, pretty cooperative turn card, but the river could be great or not so great. Do you have a plan on either of these cards? Do you really know how often these cards hit or miss your opponent's range? If not, stick around. That's what we're going to talk about today. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit. Today I want to talk about playing pocket queens and give you some tips for playing queens on different river cards. So without further ado, let's jump right into it and start with an example from the Advanced Poker Workbook. And let's jump over to page 159, and here's the prompt up at the top. So with blinds at 501k in a tournament, you open raise to 2.5k on the button and the big blind defends. They check call your 3.3k flop c-bet and also your 12k turn barrel. So that's the action leading up to this point so far. Here is our opponent's range right this moment, and the exercise itself is going to go through two different things. So essentially how often this river card is hitting versus missing our opponent's range on a king and also on a 3 of clubs. So let's start by doing this first river card. We'll work on the king of spades, plug everything into Flopzilla, and just for the record, the range itself from our opponent, go to page 159 in the answer key. You can just copy this right here, go into Flopzilla, paste it in very simply, hit enter, and there we go. And you notice that if you look at the image in the workbook, you might say, oh, well, this is binary. If a hand like 8-7 suited is in here, it means it's in here 100% of the time. But that's actually why you want to grab the range strand from the answer key, because you notice that 8-7 suited is only in there 40% of the time, and all the weights are already activated inside of the strand itself. So when you pop it into Flopzilla, you are good to go. So we have our hand, we have the board right this moment, have our opponent's range, and let's run it through the river card, which the first one is the king of spades, and see what things are looking like. Now when you're doing the work in the workbook itself, what we're doing here is looking at how often our opponent's range is hitting kind of really strong versus marginally strong versus not so much on different river cards, and looking at them side by side, especially on something that's a high card like a king of spades and kind of a lower, more bricky card like the 3 of clubs in this scenario. We're trying to look at kind of representative cards that hit kind of the strong side of the spectrum and are a little more bricky. That way you can look at them again side by side. So let's start filling out this top section. So again, on this river card, their range contains what? 2 pair plus, what percentage of the time, over pair plus, top pair plus, etc. And we can just do all of that right here in Flopzilla and just take 2 seconds and do that. So if we're looking first at the 2 pair plus, we can just go over to Flopzilla. We can uncheck everything except for 2 pair plus. So put the little blue filter mark next to those, make sure it's grayed out in all of the others. And we see over here that the combination of all of the 2 pair plus combos, that's 2 pair, that's sets, that's straights, which aren't applicable here, but if it were, all of those would be over here. And we notice right now that that is 26% of hands. So 26% of the time is how often they are going to have 2 pair plus. And for over pair plus, we can simply click that in, and the king is not really going to do a tremendous amount for that because our opponent doesn't have any pocket aces here, so that's not going to factor in at all. It's going to be the exact same number, 26. Perfect. Top pair plus is going to be just a little bit of that, but not that much, gets us up to 27%. Perfect. And middle pair plus, again, click those in, and all of that is factored in, still 27. And any pair or better means we're also going to factor in the pocket pairs below the second card, all of those weak pairs, and that's what we're looking at. Right that moment, notice that pops us right up to 89%. And we can check the answer key real quick, make sure we're on the right track. So again, king of spades on the river, we have 26, 26, 27, 27, 89, and all of that looks perfect so far. Alright, so with the king of spades explored, let's jump over and do the 3 of clubs instead. So in Flopzilla, we can just get rid of the king of spades, put in the 3 of clubs, and do the exact same analysis. So we're going to start with the 2 pair or better, and that is 27%. When we jump over to over pair plus in Flopzilla, nothing of that involved, so we're still at 27. Top pair plus going to be the exact same thing. Perfect. And middle pair plus, notice we jump up to the 62.6, round that up to 63. Perfect. And any pair plus, which means we're also going to include those weak pairs, is going to jump us all the way up to 96%. Alright, check the answer key real quick, make sure we're all on the right track. 27, 27, 27, 63, 96. Perfect, we did all of that correctly as well. So the workbook at this point is looking at the technical exploration of this setup, and that's all well and good. But I want to take you a step further and go through some of the tangential exploration you can actually do with a spot like this. So when you find yourself in a situation like this, be it with something like queens or maybe a 10x hand that backed into it, or really anything, you can start to say, okay, how can I make better decisions based upon the technical exploration that I've done off table? Let's talk about that real quick. So first and foremost, one of the biggest discrepancies you want to look at here is the middle pair plus part of the range. And you notice when it is the king of spades on the river, that middle pair plus is only 27% versus the three of clubs on the river. All of a sudden, that middle pair plus is 63%. And you might be wondering, well, what the heck is going on? Well, a large part of this is that the king of spades coming on board pushes the 8 pairs, since there's a lot of those in our opponent's range. If we look at their range in a little more detailed fashion, all of a sudden those 8 combos get pushed down to third pair, so they're not going to get included in middle pair plus. That's just going to be the 10x stuff. Versus when it's the 3 of clubs on the river, now all of a sudden that 8 is still considered middle pair, and as such that's going to get included there instead of getting chunked all the way back into any pair plus, if in case you're wondering what the heck is going on there. But one of the things we can do to go further in this exploration is to use my river bet versus check spreadsheet. I'll leave a link for this in all of my spreadsheets down below. It's a name your own price product if you're interested, and yes, you can get it for $0. But essentially what you can do is compare the EV of checking it versus betting the river instead. So I've already thrown a couple of numbers in here, for instance the pot size right this moment, but we do need to factor in a couple of different numbers, such as if we do bet, what is our bet size, and given the fact that it's already 36.1 in the middle, only 25k effective, let's just say we're just going to explore the bet size of a full shove from hero, and then we need a couple of check and win numbers, check and lose numbers, win percentage when we get called, that sort of fun stuff. We can get all that stuff from Flopzilla. Let's actually start by looking at the 3 of clubs first. So one of the things we can do is say, okay, if we check behind on the river, and we're going to assume that this is the entire range that our opponent is checking on the river to us, if we were to check it behind, how often do we win? Well, we can go into Flopzilla right this moment, take their entire range, which is already selected because we don't have this in green. So against their entire range, our equity right this moment is going to be 72.65. Let's just round that to 73 and call that good. So check and win percentage is 73%, and notice the EV of checking behind is 26k, give or take. But of course, we already knew that the EV of checking behind was going to be positive, and pretty darn positive. But what's really interesting is the EV of betting the river instead. So essentially we need 2 more things here. One is the win percentage when called, so when we fire and our opponent continues, what is our equity in that scenario, and then if we bet, how often are they going to fold based upon that. So one of the first things we have to decide is, okay, when we fire, what is our opponent going to continue with? Are they only going to continue with 2 pair plus? Are they going to continue with top pair or better? And let's just for the moment assume they're going to continue with 2 pair plus. Let's just run with that for the moment, which of course means they are going to do that 27% of the time, which means they're going to be folding the other 73%. So the how often they fold number is 73%. And our equity, when they continue with that, we can do a click down here. This will lock in our opponent's range, which is of course going to give us 0% equity because all of that beats us, right? If they only continue with 2 pair plus, all that crushes us. Win percentage when called 0%, and as such, given this, the EV of plus 19k give or take, it would be actually better for us to, instead of going for the fire, to actually check it behind instead, given the assumptions we've made so far. However, let's actually change the assumptions a little bit. So instead of this, let's say instead of them just continuing with 2 pair plus, we actually think they're going to continue with middle pair or better. So they're going to continue with that 8x hand when they have them, and they're going to fold everything else. So they're going to fold all the weak pairs like 4x and all that kind of fun stuff, which means of course that 2 things are changing. 1, our equity when we get called, and 2, how often our opponent is folding right this moment. So you notice that they are, instead of folding a large chunk, are actually only going to fold 37% of the time now. So we can pop that right in there, and when we come in here and lock it, notice that our equity is 56% as opposed to 0, and that's going to factor in massively when it comes to the overall EV. And you notice now the EV pops up about an extra big big blind and a half, which is nothing to sneeze at the end of the day, and will make this a better bet instead of a check behind. So this is all well and good, and probably something that you could have looked at the original spot in the first place and said, yeah, well, I have queens and the river is fairly brickish and it looks like a good spot to just continue firing queens. Why are we even talking about this, right? Because most people will just fire the river as well and not give it too much of a thought. But at least now you know how to compare the checking behind EV to the actual betting EV, given the assumptions we've made. However, the more interesting thing is, what about the river when it's the king of spades instead of something like a 3 of clubs? Because a lot of players will look at the king of spades on the river and get so incredibly frustrated because it's of course another overcard, and now all of a sudden they're in panic mode and they just start checking behind every single time and really never even consider going for a bet. However, what's the EV of betting in this situation, and is the EV of checking the exact same? Well, let's look at it. So let's start by going back to Flopzilla, getting rid of the 3 of clubs, putting in the king of spades, and then going back to the spreadsheet and filling in the numbers accordingly. So you notice that when our opponent has their entire range, if we were to just check behind, again, assuming our opponent is checking that entire range on the king of spades, then you notice that our equity is 73%, exact same as it was before actually, and you notice that our EV then is going to be the exact same. But now let's look at the EV of betting the river and comparing the EV in that spot. So what we need, again, those same 2 numbers. So first and foremost, how often are they going to fold? Well, we have to make some assumption on how often our opponent is going to, or what our opponent is going to continue with when we do decide to fire. Again, we're going to assume a 25k shove in this spot. Then let's say they're going to continue with top pair or better, and that's it. Well, if that's the case, again, they are folding 73% of the time. Boop, 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 73. And when we lock that in, of course, our equity is going to be 0 because that absolutely crushes us. And of course, this EV is going to be much, much worse when we bet the river. However, what if we thought our opponent was actually going to continue with that middle pair or better? So all those 10x combos are going to continue as well. Well, again, still going to be pretty garbage because they're continuing, and when they do, we are absolutely destroyed because they're continuing at roughly the same amount. But things get a little bit more interesting when we think our opponent is also going to continue with pretty much those 8x combinations. But the issue here is that Flopzilla is throwing all pairs into the weak pair bucket. So not just a 8x, but also 4x, also deuce x, and that's going to mess things up a little bit, or could mess things up, because your opponent could look at this and say, well, if you fire here for 25k, maybe you look really bluffy because you're doing that on the king, and maybe you wouldn't do that necessarily with things like 10x or pocket queen, so maybe you're a little more polarized, maybe you have a lot of bluffs, and maybe they can talk themselves into calling with any pair. Not saying that is the case, but that's the way that you can, again, go into further exploration here. But as it plays right now, you could right click in here and you could deselect all the 4x combinations and just keep the 8x stuff in. Totally your call. For the moment, I'm just going to say, okay, actually, you know what? Let's do that. Let's just keep in the 8x stuff. So we're going to deselect all of this, all of that, all of that, all of that. Only going to continue with the 8x combinations. Cool. And you notice here that they are continuing, what, 35? I'm sorry, folding 35, 34% of the time. Folding 34. And our win percentage when called, we have that locked in right now. Equity at 59%. And let's see what that looks like. Notice again, we get that equity bump, we get the EV bump, and now all of a sudden we're plus or minus to the tune of 2.5 big blinds, actually 3 big blinds when it comes to the EV comparison based upon, again, the assumptions we've made. Now, of course, in real time, you're not going to have a calculator with you, and you're not going to have Flopzilla with you, and you're not going to have GTO Plus with you. However, by doing enough of this stuff off table and running through exercises similar to this, especially representative situations just like this, and again, the queens exercise here is very similar whether you have something like queens or pocket jacks or ace 10 in a scenario like this. The overall analysis and output is going to be very, very representative because it's going to cover a decent chunk of similar hands and on similar kind of river textures, and that's going to be very helpful at the end of the day. But it's only by doing this kind of technical exploration between sessions that you have any chance of being able to kind of be in the ballpark in real time. Otherwise, you're just going to look at your hand and say, oh, I have queens, that's good on a 3 but terrible on a king. Maybe, but by doing this kind of exploration, you kind of have a much better idea of what is good versus much, much better versus not so much. And if you see the value in doing this kind of work and you want to go a step further further, make sure you have the answer keys, make sure you know what you're doing, and make sure that the spots you're exploring are worthwhile. Definitely make sure to pick up your copy of the workbook today. Splitsuit.com/advanced to get started. Covers everything from 3-betting to 4-betting to pre-flop all-ins to different post-flop analysis just like this, floating, auto profit, pot geometry, and everything in between. And also your copy of the workbook, other than just coming with the answer key, a complete companion video course so you know exactly how to do every single section, also comes with all of the GTO Plus files. So if you have the GTO Plus software, you can follow along through the entire game tree, including this exact one from the situation we looked at with Pocket Queens here today. Again, splitsuit.com/advanced to get started. I think you're really going to enjoy it if you want to take a much more advanced look at the technical side of poker. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out today. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully this helps you understand how to look at these situations much more technically. And if you have any comments or questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you back shortly with a brand new video. In the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.